Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned? Welcome. It used to be that when you started a job, you were there for life and you knew you were going to retire, but not so much anymore. You jump from job to job as you move up the corporate ladder. And then sometimes you stop the corporate ladder climb for a little bit and re-enter. How do you do it? What's the quickest way? Well, with me is Rona Davis from RWD Executive Search Firm, and we're going to find out how to get back into the market and stay in the market if you are already there. And I would like to welcome Rona. Rona, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Now, you do only executive searches.
Right. My firm specializes in senior executive level search across a wide range of industries in technology, operations, marketing, and finance for the most part.
Prior to starting the show here, we were talking about how the landscape has changed, and you came up with a really good analogy of a highway. Would you kind of explain that?
Well, corporate America is beginning to recognize that women in particular have a career path that in some ways it can be likened to driving on a highway. These days we speed up in certain lanes, and then for certain reasons that have to do with the way our work-life balance works out, we might want to get off. So there is a new term these days that's being coined by corporate America, which is off-ramping and on-ramping. How do you get off the corporate ladder for a period of time? And if you want to come back on, how do you get back on? And if you think of the metaphor, you might need to go back on-ramping, slow down a little bit, look both ways, merge onto your lane, and then ultimately speed up when you feel comfortable.
Do you find that women are stopping because they want to take a break from corporate America just to see what else is out there in the world and to travel or to have family? And how do they handle that when they're leaving? Do they come back? I'm asking more than one question.
But I get it. Invariably, the overwhelming reason is family and raising children. We women have in some ways been the victims of our own success. When we often find ourselves in a position of success, we've been in the workforce, let's say 8 or 10 years, perhaps we're in our 30s now, we have sacrificed having children and are at a point where we want to start a family, and that often is the exact point where we've gotten to middle management and now are ready to go into senior management, and that extra spurt of energy that you need perhaps to put your career into that next gear coincides with the proverbial biological clock. So there is a decision that has to be made. Do we compete with our male counterparts, and do we take on that higher level job, which may require considerable amount of time, or do we go on the off-ramp for a while and make some sacrifices in our career for the virtue of having children?
If we take the off-ramp at this point in time, and let's say you're 38, and you stay out of the workforce for what's the normal, 8 years to your children, especially if you have 2 children or 3 children, they're all in school, and then you come back. So actually, while you've lost 8 years, you're now 46, and you're competing with the 38-year-olds that are coming up the ladder.
Well, you've painted a very realistic picture. We see many women in this situation, and you've pretty much framed the age group that is having this issue. Depending on what kind of a job you've left, 8 years can be a kiss of death. If you're in a field that is constantly evolving, being away 1 year might be too long, and you might have to rethink how you're coming back into the workforce and what position you're really going to take coming back into the workforce. When we speak to our HR representatives at most of the corporations that we work with, we really, there's a guide. Anybody that's been out of a senior level corporate position for more than 3 or 4 years generally will have an extremely difficult time coming back into the same company, even at the level that they left it. I mean, give up coming back anywhere above the level that you might have left it, but even at the level. And a lot of that has to do with how corporations feel about the people who have remained in their jobs over the years and didn't have the luxury of leaving. And so there are those issues, the compression issues of coming back in and competing with the people who have remained. In addition, very often women come to us who have been out of the workforce for a while and don't necessarily have realistic expectations of what they are willing to do in order to come back into the workforce.
Do you find that the people, when they come back into the workforce, let's say they come back where they left off, there's animosity with the people that they're working with now because the people have changed and maybe the boss is still there or maybe the boss has moved on?
Well, the chances are that they would actually be able to come back and even work in the same department are slim. It just would be a coincidence if they were able to do that. Certainly if they had a relationship with a boss and they kept in touch over the years, and that's rare, and stayed close, that's your personal network, and that's a whole different topic. But to think that everything is going to be frozen in time from the time that you left to the time that you come back is not realistic. I think that the HR departments and the people in human resources tend to be concerned about the animosity that may be felt by the peers that the person who's off the ramp comes back to. In reality, we don't see that too often.
Let's say you're off ramp. What should you do while you're off ramp in knowing that you're going to be going back on the ramp?
What we find is it takes about a year to really get back on track, or even to get back in the game, not just to position yourself to get back on track. And what tends to happen is people will come to us thinking that they will start a job search and hopefully expect to have a new job in a month or two. And it generally takes considerably longer period of time if you've been out of the workforce for a while. There are many things that I would recommend that someone does order to, well, for instance, volunteer. Join either a networking group or charity. The thing that we discover that happens to many women when they come out of the workforce is that they not only lose their business relationships, but they lose all their relationships, and they go on a track where they are in a preschool or they're in an elementary school, and they're meeting a different a social group of people who are very removed from their former business lives. And they almost have to do that to feel comfortable with their new lives, to adjust in their new lives. And we hear so often from these women that, oh God, I haven't spoken to this person or that person in so many years, I'm embarrassed to even call them. So you can do one of two things. You can either pick up the phone and call them, or you can start a new business network. And some of the best ways to do that is to get involved in some sort of networking organization or some sort of a charitable organization, because in almost every one of those organizations, you will find business executives who are giving of their time too. It's pretty common these days for people in senior management roles to have extracurricular networks, as well as to give a lot of their time or whatever time they have to charity. So a great opportunity to meet people in a business or a quasi-business setting is through either a women's networking group, possibly one that has something to do with your old job or your old profession, or a charitable foundation. And it's volunteer work, but generally speaking, if you have a marketable skill, they'll put you to work right away, and you'll find yourself often working elbow to elbow with a senior vice president from some phenomenal firm that has an opportunity to see you in a light that you don't really get a chance to show when you're in preschool.
What kind of skill should somebody be on top of while they're off-ramping? Either they're off-ramp or they're a senior citizen who has been downsized because they've reached the mandatory retirement age of whatever it is in the business that they're in. What should they do to keep up, to go forward?
I think we spend the first 10 to 15 years of our work lives doing what we have to do. I think that what happens to people as they approach their 40s, if they're smart, is they start doing what they love to do. And in my experience, doing what you love to do, you'll shine. So if you can think about the things in business that you succeeded in and did well, perhaps you were a good organizer, perhaps you were a strong manager of other people, perhaps you were just great on the telephones, maybe you were just a great writer. Whatever that skill is that you know you do well, that's the skill that you should offer to the charity or to the networking group. Even within networking groups, there are committees. There are mentoring committees, and there are committees events committees, marketing committees. If you were an accountant, there are committees to keep the books of the networking group. So whatever your skill is, you should offer it. And do it on a part-time, low-key basis. If you're volunteering, whatever time you give is what they'll accept, generally speaking. It's a great opportunity to keep some of your skills well-honed and show people who may be in a position later on to help you show them and demonstrate to them what you're capable of doing.
Going forward, you're coming back. How do you put this on your resume?
Gaps should be evident on the resume. We have seen plenty of people over the years try to disguise it, cover it up, fill it in with, garden clubs. It's not realistic. And if it appears ever that you are trying to, in any way, hide something or fabricate something on the resume, it will sneak up and bite you later on. There is simply no question about that. And whatever goodwill you might have engendered in the interview process will be blown immediately upon being found out. So there's simply never a good time to do anything less than be incredibly truthful. And it's more acceptable these days to have left the workforce and come back.
So what do? Do you say left the workforce? What do you put, missing years, went off hiking, what do you put in
Neither.
there?
Generally speaking, let's just take a 15-year continuum on a career.
Right.
From 1994 to 2000, you show that you were at a particular company.
Okay.
And then perhaps in 2000 is when you left that company and you were home. And then now it's 2006, or let's say 2002 to 2004, you were home, and now 2004, you might have found some job that does not necessarily have a rational relationship to the first job, but there's a gap. Ignore the gap. Make your dates accurate. The reader of the resume will figure it out that there was a gap and will ask about the gap. Don't be cute and write domestic engineer or anything like that. It's self-evident.
Let's just say you just took time off, to start a business. Is that, if you take time off to start a business, is that
different?
Is that considered a kiss of death because of
Absolutely
the fact?
not.
Well,
no, absolutely not. That's different than taking time off to raise a family. When you take time off to raise a family, everybody forms their we all understand what that is. You don't have to describe the day-to-day chores of raising a family or the pleasures of raising a family in your resume. However, if in fact what you did is you were taking a certain skill set that you had developed in your corporate job and now you were doing something entrepreneurial, well, that's something that the reader of the resume would have no understanding of unless you gave them the roadmap and explained it to them. So identify the company, whatever you named it, or the endeavor, whatever it was, and have a few bullet points and explain the purpose of the business, what your achievement was within that business. Even if it didn't take off, there must have been some achievement that you can find in that. And then a couple of skills that you applied towards those achievements that you were able to make during the time that you went off and tried your own venture.
How many pages should a resume be?
That's a good question, because there's a misconception that resume should be 1 page long. Now, I always tell people, if you have 3 years of business experience, you generally have a 1 page resume. If you have 20 years of business experience, putting that all in a 1 page resume equates you to a 3-year person. So don't do that. It is absolutely acceptable to have a 2-page resume, and often you could have a 3-page resume. I would not have a resume longer than 3 pages, because your writing ability is absolutely judged by how you write your resume. And people do not realize how important the resume is. It is your calling card. It introduces you before a face is ever put to the name. I cannot stress enough how important it is to proofread a resume. I cannot stress enough how important one typo can blow your resume. I'm not kidding. I've seen hiring managers and HR people just, when you have 100 resumes on your desk that come in a month or in a week or whatever the time period is, you really start to cut, and the slightest thing could cut somebody's resume out. Typos, that's sloppy. That shows a lack of attention to detail, perhaps a lack of caring. Perhaps the person doesn't even know any better. So many assumptions are made based on the way one presents themselves on paper.
There's a certain kind of paper you should use, or it doesn't matter?
That does not matter at all.
Does it matter if you send it by email?
No.
Or even
tends not to. Well, generally speaking, it's always a good idea, unless you're answering Monster or something like that, which has its own set of rules. But if you're actually responding to an ad, or you are sending a resume in cold, if you're sending a resume in cold, it's generally very helpful to call the person to whom you're sending the resume. You'll generally get an assistant in the office, and if you're smart, you'll make friends with the assistant to the best of your ability and find out how that person likes to receive their resumes, whether they do prefer it in paper, in a letter, whether they prefer a cover letter, or a cover letter is just superfluous and they're going to when I get resumes all the time with cover letters, and I tend to rip the cover letter off and go right to the resume, because to me the cover letter is they're marketing themselves and packaging themselves, and I want to see what their history is first. If the history appeals to me, then I'll go back to the cover letter.
Particular format, chronological?
Definitely. Chronological, most recent first, most recent position first. And if there are gaps, you don't have to describe the gaps, but just make sure that the dates of employment are accurate.
Now, do you also suggest that people put on like hobbies, skills, references?
References, no.
Okay.
References, there should be a line that says references available upon request, and always be prepared if you're actually called in for an interview, and it's going well, and you're asked, can you give me some references? You don't want to say, I'll get back to you on that. You want to be ready with those references. Hobbies. Hobbies that have some bearing on your ability to work, your work ethic, your diligence are always great. If you're a marathoner, I would definitely put it down. If you like gardening, I wouldn't bother. Unless, of course, you're in some sort of artistic field, and flower arranging happens to be a hobby of yours, and then it might have some bearing on the work that you want to be doing. But generally speaking, the kinds of hobbies that you might put down should have some influence on the kind of lifestyle that you lead and the kind of worker that you might be.
You've got the job. What kind of salary should you expect coming back into the workforce?
Well, it depends on the level in which you're coming back. If you're, I'll give you the easiest example. If you're coming back and you've reinvented yourself, and you're coming back into an organization or to a role that you've never held before, be prepared to take whatever the market will bear. It probably will have no relationship to what you're used to earning in your former life. And that's okay, because essentially when you're coming back into the workforce and decide that you no longer want to pursue the track or the career path that you had been on, but you'd like to take those skills and apply it to another area that you love, you have to be willing to be practically entry level. Gain experience for a year or two, have a certain record of achievement that you build up, and you'll take that to your next job where you'll be able to command a higher salary. You have to be willing to go a few steps backwards to go many steps forwards. And those who are not willing to do that will waste a lot of time turning down opportunities. You have to be smart enough to see an opportunity for what it is and grab it and make something out of it, and then take that and take it to the next job. And that's the way to build your second act.
Do you still find that women are still grossly underpaid? Or maybe grossly is a strong word. A price differential, let's put it that way.
It depends on what industry, to be frank. It really does depend on what industry. In financial services, that gap is closing. It has a lot to do with how often one makes a job move. The more people make a job move, the higher they tend to be paid, because with each job move they tend to get a bigger raise. People who've stayed in one company for most of their career will get the inflation raises and things like that. So we're not finding as great a disparity in 2006 as we did in 1986. But it is there, but it's often there because women have gone on a different track.
Words of advice for the senior market that they want to stay active. They want to stay active. Sometimes they need to stay active to pay their medical bills. And sometimes they do it just because they have nothing else to do.
I would advise seniors almost identically to the way I would advise younger people. First of all, know what you are looking to accomplish with going back to work. Understand yourself well enough to know how many hours you're really willing to work and what you're really not willing to do. And that goes to any age person. Then understand how much money you're looking to make, or whether you are doing this because you want to get out of the house and you just want to supplement your income. But what's more important? Is it more important to find a role that's going to fulfill you and going to enable you to impart your wisdom and your experience in a situation, or do you just need the cash? Your choices will be very different depending on what your answer is to that question. Seniors are, again, in 1986, I don't believe that seniors were as valued as they are today. We have an aging workforce. The baby boomers are in control, and that seems to be dictating how seniors are being viewed. For our senior executive positions, one of our biggest challenges these days is to find people who have sufficient years of experience to be able to take on a position that might actually have 200 people reporting to them. And you need to be a senior person to do that. So we're finding people staying in the workforce and getting significantly better jobs into their 60s. The seniors who have retired in their 60s and 70s and want to now have a second act, reinvent themselves, are potentially looking at a different kind of business opportunity. And those people might do better working in, again, charities, networking organizations, mentor programs, and they can offer up that single skill that they know they do really well, that they were paid well for at one time in their careers, and now they can trade on that on that success by offering it to younger people, and potentially, if they have some success doing that, being recognized by the people who are running the organization for which they're volunteering that time. We've seen many instances of volunteerism turning into actual paid work. It can happen. You just have to be willing to start low. It's not that different than what that I give advice to people coming out of college, and it's not all that different. Find a business that you love, a company that you believe in, something that you really can sink your teeth into, that you could really, be happy to go to work to every day, and get a job, potentially low-level job in that business or that company. If you're doing what you really like to do, you'll probably excel, get recognized for it, and move up the ladder. Most of the people that we deal with who are really successful will tell you that they started very low in a company that they had a entry-level job in, and have been recognized with consistent promotions, doing well because they're happy and they love it, and they really became part of that business community that they're in.
In the closing moments of the show, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, if you have left the workforce for reasons that are personal to you and you want to come back, expect to take some time, understand yourself, be willing to start at the bottom, try a few different things, and then find something that you really like and will get recognized for, and you'll probably do very well at it.
Rona, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you for joining us. I hope you've learned something about changing jobs, on ramps, off ramps, and coming back and succeeding. Love to hear from you. Rona would be pleased to answer any of your questions, so write us here at the Women's Connection. Look forward to hearing from you. Bye now.